All right, so in the last video, what we did is we started to create our cheese catalog application. We basically just set up an Express application with a simple router for our cheese routes with no handlers or anything yet. We created a cheese models file, but we never actually did anything with it. We set up db.json to kind of spoof our data source, database, whatever you want to say, and that's kind of it. So I guess the next thing to do would be just to set up our cheese model so that we can start working with it and start creating entries for our catalog, and so that we can, query them and all that stuff. Okay, so I think I said in the last video that I've been using this module pattern, which I will continue to do so. And let's see here. So we are going to eventually want to return an object, which I'm just going to do object.freeze. This is obviously not an important application by any stretch of the imagination, but this model is also kind of just functioning as our data contract. We're going to do just a little bit of validation in here just to make it a little bit more, just to make it beefier. So I'm just using object.freeze so that it doesn't accidentally get modified somewhere down the road, even though this application doesn't really have it down the road. And so let's define a type of cheese, and we are going to have an ID, which is going to be a string, a name, which is going to be a string, a date, which this is you could consider it date open, date purchase, date whatever. I'll leave it up to you, but we're going to manually create this. We're going to have a timestamp for creation, so you probably don't want that date to be creation. We'll do this as a number because we'll just do, we'll just do this as date.getTime or whatever. And then finally we'll have opened. So a Boolean to basically just let us know if we've opened the cheese that we've purchased, just to give us something interesting to update when we update. Okay, so this is going to return cheese, which obviously it's not happy with that yet, but it will be soon. And so what we're about to define here will really be the request body for the, so 1 second, interface cheese factory args. So the idea is that we can just spread the request body into here. So basically we're also kind of now defining the request contract, even though we're not really exposing it anywhere. And we want the user to be able to pass the name as a string, the date as a string. I'm going to have this date format be month, day, year, which we will do. Why is it not happy this? Oh, oopsies. And then we can do some validation on this once again, just to make things a little bit beefier. And finally, we'll do open, but we'll do it as an optional because we'll set the default to false. But you have the option just to create a cheese from the get-go that's already opened. So this is going to be cheese factory args, name, date, opened, false. And so now the first thing that we'll do is import UUID from unique ID. So in the last video, I went over which dependencies that we would be needing in this video. And before I actually got on camera for part 2, or sorry, started screen recording for part 2, I also added Axios because I realized that we'd need it. But I'll remind you when we actually get to when we need it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create our ID, which we're generating here on the server, and we'll return that as part of our return object. Then we will also have our name, and we'll do name.toLowercase just for some consistency. Date, for now we'll just do new date because we're going to validate first, and then you'll see. And then finally opened. And then timestamp will be new date dot get time. Okay. So let's validate our name first. So if the name is non-existent, or if the name.length, so if it's an empty string, we're going to throw an error. So we're going to say throw new error. You must include a valid name for your cheese. And then if the date is empty, or if date.split / .length is not equal to 3. So like we said, we want month, month, day, day, year, year, year. So we're going to validate based on that. You must include a date with format, month, month, day, day, year, 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 year. Okay. And obviously, this is like a pathetic level of validation. Probably better ways of doing this. Definitely better ways of doing this, but it's just really to add some bulk to our project. And then finally, we will extract the month, the day, and the year from the date that we pass in. And then here we can go parse int year, parse int month -1, because obviously it's the human being passing in the month, and they're going to use a 12-month calendar, where this will use a 0 to 11-month calendar, which is still 12 months, but 0 indexed. And finally, parse int day. Okay. So that should do it, unless we made a mistake, but we won't find out for a little bit. Okay. And so the data flow for our application, basically, when somebody makes a request, it goes through our router. If we had any middleware, it would go through the middleware, and then it would go through the handler, and then it would go through the controller. And the controller is the layer that speaks to the data source, and that's all it does. And so even though that's the flow of data in, the flow of data out, of course, is the other way. So we're going to start with our controller. And so we're going to go cheese.controller.TypeScript or .ts const cheese controller. And we're going to finally export cheese controller. And we're going to have insert. Those are all going to be asynchronous. So let's just take that and copy this. We're going to have fetch. We're going to have fetch by ID. So I think in video 1, I started to say that like controllers, like their methods or functions only do one thing with the way that I like to build things out. So that's why these are different. So that you wouldn't have to do any kind of logic in here to determine what to fetch. It just very deterministically goes and does what it needs to do with whatever it's given. So that's why I separate that out here, and it's really the handler that handles any of the orchestration between these controller functions. We'll do remove. And we'll do update, which I'm actually just going to switch the order of these because I'm a weirdo. And this is going to be export default. And finally, we will return an object containing all of these: insert, fetch, fetch by ID, update, and remove. And then because we're using db.json, we actually interface with it using HTTP requests. So that's why I added Axios as a dependency. And so we're just going to have const base URL is equal to http for localhost 3000 / I think we called it cheeses. We'll find out very soon if we did or not. Okay, so oopsies, copied it for no reason there. I do want to copy this though, because that's what we're going to throw into Postman once we get there. Okay. So our insert operation here is literally just going to take one argument. We're doing it as an object. We could just pass cheese as a single arg, but we'll just pass it as a value in an object. And so cheese, which I guess I need to export from here. Export. And then import it here. And then data equals await axios.post base URL, and then it's going to post the cheese and it's going to return the data. So that's our controller. Now let's go set up our handler. Cheese handler equals, and we'll export default cheese handler, and then we will have create. I guess we should call it, or could call it insert, but I'm just going to call it create. Get, and then this will just call update, and this will call remove, because we can't call it delete. And we'll return these, create, get, update, remove. Because these are handlers, they will all take response, which is going to be an express response, as well as a request, but in this order, request then response. And these will all be asynchronous. So I'm actually just going to copy this and go back here and do that like that. And then eventually we will need this again. So I'm just going to copy it again. Okay. And then we will take the body of our requests. We'll also set up a try catch block, because why not? And I believe if I do error type here, it's going to get mad. Catch clause variable type annotation must be any or unknown. So I'll say any. And then we will do res.status is 500.send message e.message. And then otherwise we are going to go like this, let cheese, and then return, or not return, sorry, res.send, return res.send cheese. Okay, so that's the basic setup here. So now we need to actually do some logic. We'll go const new cheese, because we already used the name cheese, equals cheese factory, and we will pass it the body, which we could have validated in middleware. We have a little bit of validation in our factory here, so we'll leave it alone. And then once we have our cheese made, we will go cheese equals, so our handler here will have our controller, and it will use it like this, controller dot insert cheese is new cheese. Okay, and we will await this. And we will see if that worked. Well, actually, no, there's one more thing that we have to do, and it's in our route here. We can go router.post, and this will be our handler. So we need to pull that in, cheese handler, which we need to import. And this will be handler.create, which we will just do like that. Okay. And we'll just restart our application here. And finally, if everything went well, we can go, not here, but we need to go here. And we said we're going to make a post request to cheeses body we'll say raw JSON name. We'll say name. We want brie cheese. Date, we'll say 05/01, so just like a day or two ago, 2022. And finally, opened, even though we don't need to include this, we'll set to false. And let's try. Connection refused. Oh. Let's see here. Cheese the log is listening, server, cheeses. So let's try just a get request. Okay, so that worked. But this did not. I wonder, did we do something we weren't supposed to do? Here, let's just get rid of this for a second and see what's going on. Okay, now we're getting something. And do we still get this? Yep, we do. Okay. Let's see what is happening. Use cheeses. We called it cheeses here. Cheeses, controller, HTTP, localhost. Oh, this is supposed to be 3001. That's why. Okay, sorry about that. We're too far in for me to go back and re-record, so we're just going to keep going. So now this should have, there we go. Okay, so that did work. So now if we go, we'll have to implement our get logic, but we can go here and see that, yep, that got inserted, no problem. Everything seems to be working okay now that we worked out that error right there. So we'll copy that instead. If you caught that while it was happening, that must have been very frustrating for you. And of course, this is probably where we would want to do what we're going to do with our QR codes. So I'm actually going to save that for a part 3 just because this video is getting kind of long as it is. So let's just go through here and as quickly as possible do the rest of our CRUD operations. Okay, so fetch is going to be const data equals await axios.get, and this is just going to be the base URL. And then it's going to return data. And of course, we should be try catching all of this and whatnot, but that's okay. We'll avoid it for now. This will just do ID as a string, and we'll go const data equals await axios.get, and then it will be our base URL / our ID, because that's the route that we're going to define following just RESTful routing. Update. Let's see. Well, for our update, we will just want to pass this thing for now. We'll use an object just because if we wanted to iterate on this later on, we can a little bit easier once this is set up like this. So we'll just say the update, and it will be type any for now. No, that's not a good idea. Let's make it a partial of cheese. And of course, we would also need explicitly the ID. And we're not going to do a put, we're going to do a patch. So const data equals await axios.patch. And we'll just copy this. And we'll return data. And don't worry, we'll validate that all this works. I'm just trying to get this up and running because, oh, and we'll also need the update here as the argument. It's pretty easy once we're here to think through these things, and we can debug them one by one if they don't work. Await axios.delete. And this will be, once again, that, because this will just take an ID as a string. I think I mentioned it before, we could just be inactivating these, and that would maybe make sense if we wanted a history of our cheese, but we'll leave it alone for now. Okay. And that's our controller in ultra lightning speed there, as we kind of just flew through these, but I hope it's pretty straightforward. So let's go to our handler. And for our get, we will just simply apply a little bit of conditional logic to know which controller that we're going to need to use. So let's start with this one, and let's go const params equals request, const id equals params, and we'll see where these params come from in just a second. Actually, I'll just go and show you now. So we're going to just define a route, which will be router.get ID. And that's what that ID is. And so then we'll have our let cheese. So I'll just mention while I get this try catch block set up that one of the advantages of doing something like this using classes instead is we could use decorators to kind of help us not have to repeat these try catch blocks and this error handling and different stuff. You can do some really cool stuff with TypeScript decorators, but maybe another video will do that. Let's send cheese, and I'm just gonna copy this because it's gonna be the exact same thing. So then we'll say if there's an ID, we'll do cheese await controller dot fetch by ID, and we'll pass the ID. Else we'll do cheese equals await controller dot fetch, which is just going to get them all. And finally, at the end here, we will return this. Okay, let's hook that up for this first get. We'll do handler dot get, and this will also be handler dot get. Let's see if that worked. Okay, so that's if we get 1. Now let's get 2 by going here, copying this, and going like this, because that's the fastest. Perfect. So we can get 1 and we can get many. So that's our oopsies. That's our get route or our get routes. And we already implemented the update, so let's do update here. And of course we would probably want to, if we were building something important, we'd want to do validation and all that stuff, but for now we're just going to go const body params equals request, and we'll go const id equals params let cheese. And I'm just going to actually copy this because this is getting kind of tedious. And we will just go cheese equals await controller dot update, and we'll pass the ID and the update, which will be the body. That looks about right. So I'm going to head over here and I'll go and I will do a patch, copy. I already have it. No, oopsies. Copy that here, copy here, and then our body, let's just try to update opened to be true. Cannot patch because we did not define that here. Router.patch handler.update. Great. So this is true, and let's just validate this for ourselves that if we go and fetch it from here, it really was updated. And finally, we will do our remove logic, which should be pretty straightforward as well. Let's see. ID equals this params, and we'll go const params equals quest, and then we'll go let cheese, oopsies, and we'll just copy this again, and we'll go remove, and it'll just be the ID. Sorry about that. And we want this same path here. Delete, send. Oh, I clicked it twice, so let's see if it worked. No, it did not. Oh, once again, I keep forgetting. Router.delete. Handler.remove. Okay, so it worked, but it did not give us the cheese that we were deleting. So, and I kind of would like to get that returned. So let's say await controller dot fetch by ID, and we'll use the ID here, and then that should work. But I guess we'll have to create another cheese, copy, delete. Great. So then this should still be empty. Okay, that was the lightning round for getting just the bulk of everything built here. In the next video, what we're gonna do is just create, use that QR package that we downloaded in part 1, and we will use that to generate, obviously, QR codes, and then that's it. That'll be the whole catalog application.